Hello, this is Dave Sugarbaker, and today is the 14th day of September 2025, and I have a little piece from the Gospel of Mark. What I'm going to talk about today is little children. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be the first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." In that reading today, as they were walking along, Jesus tells the disciples that he will be encountering betrayal and death, and that he will rise again after 3 days. And the disciples don't have a clue what he's talking about. And more than that, they're afraid to ask Jesus for any clarification. They reach their destination, Capernaum, and go into the house. And we're supposed to know that this house is the house that Jesus always stays in when he's in Capernaum. It's Peter's house. Jesus just casually asks what the disciples had been arguing about while they were walking along the road. Of the 12, not a single one of them would tell him, because they were arguing about who outranked who in the pecking order of the new kingdom that Jesus was talking so much about. It reminds me a bit of the lyrics from Jesus Christ Superstar, and in my mind, as soon as I see this lyrics, I can hear the song playing in my head. At the Last Supper, the disciples have had a little too much wine. "Look at all my trials and tribulations sinking in a gentle pool of wine. Don't disturb me now, I can see the answers. Till this evening is this morning, life is fine. Always hoped that I'd be an apostle, knew that I would make it if I tried, and then when we retired, we can write the Gospels, so they'll all talk about us when we've died." As I said last week, I'm impressed that the Bible is so unflinching when it paints the Old Testament and New Testament figures in their full, sometimes clueless humanity. Throughout the gospel narratives of Jesus' life and teaching, the disciples really don't get it. After all, the Gospels were written 50 to 100 years after the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. So the Gospel writers understood that no one could have comprehended what Jesus was really all about until after his death and his resurrection. No one could really know what the story was all about until the story was finished. So when they write about the disciples, we see their cluelessness. At least the disciples had the good sense to be embarrassed when Jesus asked them what they had been arguing about when they walked along the road. They didn't want to tell Jesus they had been wrangling about who outranked who. In typical fashion, Jesus proceeds to address what the disciples had been arguing about. They didn't have to tell him, he knew. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." We hear this from Jesus time after time. The last shall be first, and the first last. In preparation for the Last Supper, Jesus washes the disciples' feet to make the same point. In today's passage, he uses a sermon illustration. It says here, "Then he took a little child and put it among them. And taking it in his arms, he said to them, 'Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me.'" Now, both Greek and Aramaic use the same word for child and servant. So we would never know this by just reading the translated English text. We have to do a little excavation to find details like this. But both a child and a servant in that culture had no status at all. And that was Jesus' point. If you welcome the ones with no status whatsoever, child, servant, if you welcome them in my name, you welcome me. And more than that, you welcome God as well. So give all this arguing about status in the new kingdom a rest. It's not about status or rank. It's about serving. I did some research about children in Jesus' time. The child mortality rates 2,000 years ago in Palestine were between 25% to 40%. So there was a 1 in 4 to almost 50-50 chance that a child born in Palestine would die. I had the mistaken idea that people died a lot earlier back then than they do now. It's not true. Human longevity hasn't changed much in the last 2,000 years. The difference is the child mortality rate. If one person lives to the age of 90 and the next person dies under the age of 1, the average age of the two is around 45. So with a 25 to 50% mortality rate among children, it was iffy to know whether a child would come to be an adult. And so growing up was a really problematic thing. Childhood wasn't even invented until the 1600s. And a child in Jesus' time and place was just an unformed future adult if he or she survived long enough to become an adult. Elsewhere in the New Testament, Jesus makes another reference to children to deal with the same issue, the issue of who will be the greatest in the new kingdom. Remember that the word child and the word servant are interchangeable in Aramaic, which was Jesus' primary language, and Greek. In Matthew, we see some similarities to the story in Mark, and there are some differences as well. The disciples, this is what it says in Matthew, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And he called a little child to him and placed the child among them, and he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." Unless you become like little children with absolutely no status whatsoever, unless you become like little servants, you will never enter God's kingdom. So, what are some of the characteristics of these statusless children? One of the characteristics of children is that they learn, and they learn really fast. So if we're to be like little children, then we always stay open to learn more today than we knew yesterday. Always, every day. So, have you got your faith all worked out? Have you got God defined and confined? Are all of your beliefs unshakably nailed down at this point? If we're to be like little children, we continue to learn, to evolve, and to grow. Some years back, I remember a particular congressman who announced that he would not attend the Pope's speech to Congress. This was not the current Pope, but the former Pope, Pope Francis. So Pope Francis was to speak to Congress. This congressman wasn't going to go because the Pope didn't agree with him on issues like climate change and the morality of wealth. And so the good congressman wasn't going to attend. Instead, he was going to stick his fingers in his ears and sing la, 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 la to ensure that he didn't hear anything that might challenge his present understandings. One of our hymns, though, says, "Time makes ancient good uncouth. They must upward still and onward who would keep abreast of truth." If we want to get into God's kingdom, we have to become like little children, ready and willing to grow and learn. Another characteristic of children is brutal honesty. Years ago, we had Grandparents' Day at school, and our grandson Kateank was 6 at the time, and we were eating breakfast with Kateank in the lunchroom at school, and he looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, you have a lot of hairs in your nose." After I recovered, I said, "I know, Kateank." He said, "You want me to pull them out?" I explained that I had a little nose hair machine that did that for me. If we want to get into God's kingdom, we have to become like little children, ready to tell it like it is. Children are the ones, who see through our pretensions and conceits and can then announce that the emperor has no clothes. If we want to get into God's kingdom, we have to become like unimportant little children, cutting through the spin and announcing truth as we see it. Now, God bless you. Thank you for taking a few minutes to listen to this. If you find value, I appreciate it if you pass it along. But in any case, God bless and take care, okay? Thank you. See you soon.